Warning: some contents may be disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised. My camping story comes from a time when I was actually still a child, probably around 12 years old at the absolute oldest. Back when I was young, my dad wanted me to get into hunting. He was a hunter, his dad was a hunter, and so on. Me, I never really had the drive to kill an animal, even for food, and while I understand that he was trying to instill a sense of survivalism in me, and trying to teach me what I would have to do if society collapsed, I am now 47, and society has yet to collapse. At this point, if it did, I'd probably just accept it and live off cans of Spam for a few months before I succumb to the elements. Well, those were completely irrelevant to the story. My apologies. Anyways, this story took place on a hunting trip that my dad had set up for myself and him during the summer break of that year. He had planned to take me out to a hunting ground that he used to hunt on and that his friend owned. The plan was that we would sit up there and find the hunting tower and just wait for the deer to come along and then shoot them. Pretty much the standard hunting trip, really. We got all of our gear together and we headed out early in the morning to get to the spot where he and I would be setting up the tents. I packed more than I needed, mostly because I was the kind of kid that would throw a fit about having to wear the same pants for days in a row, and we were supposed to be out for the whole weekend. After luggaging everything into the truck, double-checking to make sure that we had our tents and all our camping equipment, I got in the car, and to be completely honest with you, I fell asleep as soon as the tires hit the asphalt. I knew he drove for an hour or two, and then I woke up to the feeling of the truck going off the road and onto the gravel or dirt paths. He pulled up to the spot where we were supposed to be at, and he asked if I was excited. I told him that I was, and despite the fact that I was barely cognizant. We grabbed our tents and all of our gear and whatnot. Then I asked him where we were supposed to set up our tents. Well, much to my dismay, he tells me that we have to hike about 10 minutes to get close to the lookout tower. I remember the look on his face when I stared daggers at him. He laughed his ass off, and then we started our trek into the woods. After about 10 minutes or so, he pointed to where the tower was and told me that that was where we would be the next morning when we actually started hunting. Then he told me to set up the tents. Yes, plural. I asked what he was going to be doing, and he said that he was going to scout the area and see what was around. Then he dropped his tent and told me that he would be back in a little bit. At first, I was pissed that he was making me do all the work, but I went to it. I set up his tent first to be nice, and then I started struggling with mine. After having a difficult time with it and saying words that my dad would have swatted me for, I finally got them both set up and got our gear in their respective tents. After that, I actually got in mine and went back to sleep. I wasn't asleep that long, probably 15 minutes or so, and I was woken up by my dad shouting my name close by. I quietly responded saying, "Yeah, Dad, I'm in my tent," and then put my head back down. Then I was shaken awake by my dad opening my tent and telling me that I needed to get up now. I asked what was going on, thinking at first that he was just messing with me. But the look on his face quickly told me that he wasn't joking. I got up and I exited my tent, and he told me that we needed to leave immediately. I told him that we just got here and asked why we needed to go. and he told me to come with him to the truck so we could leave. I asked about our camping gear, and he basically told me to shut up and do what he told me to do. Being 12, I wasn't going to argue with him any more than I had. So at this point, my dad had dragged me away from the campground, left all of our gear out there, and was in a hurry to leave. So the only thing I could think to do was ask what was wrong. He didn't respond at first, but when I asked again, he once again told me to stop asking questions, and then he just kept driving. Obviously, I was annoyed, but I just sat there and stared out the window and pouted. I got even more confused when he pulled into a police station and then told me to stay in the car. I was going to ask why, but he was quick to get up and run up to the station before I could. I just continued to sit there and stare at nothing in particular. Then after about 10 minutes, he ran back out and we got back on the road. But this time, a cop cruiser was following us. And before I could ask anything, he literally told me to keep my mouth shut and not ask any more questions at all. He pulled back up to the spot where our gear was and told me to stay put. Then, he and the officer started off in the forest. Again, I was 12, and it was the late 80s, and I was not about to just sit there and do nothing bored out of my mind. Honestly, I kind of wish I had. I waited for a few minutes, and then followed behind my dad and the officer, just far enough that I knew where they were, but was distant enough to have them probably not notice me. I followed them for a bit, and then they stopped, and my dad and the officer were standing by a broken fence line. Basically, it looked like someone had knocked down the post to a barbed wire fence, and it hadn't been replaced yet. I just stood there, and I heard my dad explaining things to the officer. He told them that we were there to hunt over the weekend, that he knew the owner of the land, and that he was just walking the perimeter to check things out. Then he said that he noticed the damaged fence and went to check it out. Then he said, "I came over to check the damage so I could let him know. But that's when I saw her." I may have been young, but I was able to put 2 and 2 together. Him freaking out, wanting to leave, getting the police, and it's exactly what you're thinking it was. Apparently, when he went ahead and checked out the area, he saw a woman's body lying in the brush. I later found out that it was actually a girl that was around 16 that had gone missing only a couple of days before, and the cops had determined that her body was likely to have been dumped by whoever had taken her life. So this was literally my one and only hunting trip, and the only time that I ever went camping. And I can technically say that I did go camping because I slept in the tent for a little while, and that means that it was camping. But jokes aside, this is the only time that my dad took me out for one of these trips. I don't think that he even got together with his buddies to hunt after this. Apparently, there is something about finding a dead body in the woods that ruins camping for you, no matter how long you've been doing it. My friends and I often went camping in the summer in a remote place in Kentucky. It was a small, unknown area that you could easily miss, especially if you're not looking for it. This was great for us because that meant there was never anyone around to bother us and throw off our fun. Sometimes, we would invite a new person or our partners to join us, but that was it. It was supposed to be for new homes, but after cutting down some of the trees, They ended up leaving the area untouched and never put in any houses. Including myself and my girlfriend Robin, there were going to be 6 people there for this weekend. I wanted some time alone with Robin, so we decided that we would stay an extra day or 2 after they left. Once we got there and got all settled, everyone started drinking and being stupid. It was a great time, but Robin wasn't one for the great outdoors. She wanted to join and be with me, which was really sweet, but she couldn't stand the bugs. She didn't like the idea of sleeping in a tent on just blankets, and she definitely didn't like there were no restrooms nearby. But she was a trooper. She tried her best to have a good time, and I think she did once she started getting a little buzzed. The first night was great, other than Robin waking up to every sound and movement. The next day was fine as well, just sitting around, drinking, and just hanging out. It's nice not to have any expectations or errands to run and just being able to kick back, eat, and sleep at your leisure. However, later that evening, while we were all talking and having a good time, Robin started looking around and staring hard into the darkness. After her doing this a few times, I asked her what was going on, and she said she felt like someone was watching us. I brushed it off at first, thinking it was just her starting to get paranoid with it getting darker. She shrugged it off at first too, but then I started seeing her go right back to it. I asked her again if there was something that she actually saw, and she again said no, but just felt uneasy. I suggested maybe we should head to bed early, thinking maybe it would help, to which she didn't hesitate, and then we headed off to our tent. We lay there, and I started drifting while she was reading a book. I'm not sure how long I was out, but at one point, she started shaking my arm trying to wake me up. When I tried to ask her what, she put a finger to her mouth, telling me to be quiet and listen. I sat there quietly, hearing only my friend's radio at first. When I mentioned this, Robin said, "The footsteps." So I again listened, when I finally started hearing what sounded like slow and patterned footsteps. I tried telling her that it was probably one of the others, just walking around drunk or trying to go to the bathroom. So to calm her down and ease her tension, I made a comment out loud to the effect of, "Don't be going over here by our tent," and smirked, looking at Robin. She didn't find it very funny, and neither did the person by our tent by the sound of the groan that I heard. And before I could respond though, one of my friends hollered back asking what I was talking about. I asked who was by my tent, and they said that they were the only other ones awake. Seeing Robin's freaked out face, I got out of the tent to see who was messing with us. That's when I confirmed that my friend was right. He started getting out of his tent too, and we both looked over behind my tent. And to my shock, it was an older guy. He had long matted hair that looked like it hadn't been brushed in years. His face was covered in what looked like dirt and also scabs. He was wearing boxers, a t-shirt, and slippers. Again, this was a remote area, and there aren't any businesses or homes nearby, so I have no idea where this guy came from. Not knowing what to do, I just looked at him and said, hello?" The man would not make direct eye contact. He always looked around me or at the ground. He also never responded, so instead I asked, "How did you get here?" And by now, Robin came out of the tent and gasped at the sight of this man. This time, he did respond, but not in English. Unfortunately, I did not know any other language, but I can at least tell if it was Spanish or French, and it was neither of those. I asked if he knew English, and again, he just mumbled something in a different language. Robin then asked him if he needed help, and she offered to call 911. But when she said this, he kept shaking his head and saying, "No, no, no," over and over as he started walking away and holding his side. Robin tried shouting out to him, but he kept saying no and something else and walked away into the night. I thought it was definitely bizarre and had no idea how this man in his condition had even got there. She said we should probably call someone in case that he got out somewhere and had something wrong with him. My friend didn't like this idea since we could get in trouble for trespassing. We had all been drinking, so there was no way that we were safe to even drive. So I calmed Robin down and told her that we will just leave with them tomorrow instead of staying longer, and that we would just call the police on our way out so they can come and look for him, to which she agreed. The next morning, we got up, had a little breakfast, and started packing to head home. The rest of the group was taking a bit longer to leave, but Robin was so anxious to see if she could find this guy before we left. So we started driving around to see if we could find him, but no luck. The area wasn't that big, but we still didn't see him. Thinking he probably wandered off somewhere else, Robin was upset, but she understood that there wasn't anything else that we could do. So we headed back over to our friends and helped as the last of them left. Nothing really came out of the situation until a few days later. Robin had come over to my place and immediately pulled up a news article. It was about a body that was found close to where we were camping. It was an older guy in his 60s that had been stabbed and bled out. I don't remember the name anymore, but what I do remember was that he was Swedish. Then, they also showed a picture of the victim. It was the same guy that we saw while we were camping, but just in better health. That also explained the different language that he was speaking. It was pretty heartbreaking. This guy was standing right in front of us, probably holding his side from the stabbing, and he didn't want us to call the police. But why? And to top it all off, the suspect was still wanted. Was the killer nearby? Did he walk by like this guy did while we were asleep? Robin ended up going to the police and talking to them. I couldn't blame her. She has too kind of a heart, which made it even worse on her, knowing that we didn't do anything. I don't know if they ever caught the suspect, but I sure hope so. For everyone's safety, and so that man can be at peace. As a child, I was really close to my father. I went everywhere with him, including camping, fishing, and hunting. He taught me how to set up a tent, how to prepare a fish to eat, and tried his best to teach me hunting tips. I enjoyed going with him, but it was hard for me to shoot them, and even harder to prepare them. I typically cried, but I tried not to show it. My dad, though, bless him, never pressured me to do it, and never teased me or made fun of me for it. He would end up doing that part when I wasn't around or sleeping or something. He even taught me some botany. I knew what plants in our area to avoid and which ones were safe to eat, and so forth. I bring this up because he, of course, was the one that made me fall in love with camping and the great outdoors. So when he died, teenager me took it very hard. I was never that close to my mother, at least not nearly as close as I was with my dad. She hated that I never wanted to do the normal girly things with her. I'd rather go fishing in the rain than go to prom in a limo. So when she tried to push more of those type of things on me, it only drove us further apart. When my father passed, I became a recluse for the longest time. I still had a year before I graduated, so I had to deal with my mother's wishes and demands till then. I did some of the things she wanted me to keep her happy, hoping that I could use it for a future request. And just that happened. A couple of my friends from school were talking about going on a camping trip when school was out, so with my grades going back up and keeping up with the chores, I asked my mom to go. At first, she was hesitant, but finally agreed to let me go. I was ecstatic and I hadn't been this happy in so long. I started packing everything up to go and waited for my friend to pick me up. When they arrived, I threw my stuff in the back of the truck and I hopped in before my mom could come out and then change her mind. And we were off. This was actually at a state park, so there were no designated camping grounds or spots. So you just had to find a place that you wanted to stay and set up. When we got there, my friends found a place that was surrounded by nothing but trees. It was beautiful. I had never been here, so I was in awe of how tall these trees were. So we set up a couple of tents that we had and then started our fire pit when one of my friends pulled out the alcohol and green. Yes, I know we shouldn't have, but I for one didn't realize that they had brought it, and I had also been in a dark place since my father died, so I made some bad choices that day. But overall, it was a great night and a much-needed getaway. We enjoyed ourselves that night, and I actually ended up passing out on a blanket by the fire. The next morning, I ended up waking up before everyone else, but I didn't want to wait around. I knew they were going to be out for a while, so I left them a note. I grabbed my bag with the gear that I had, and then I headed off on my own. I grabbed a pamphlet on our way here and saw that hunting and fishing was permitted. So, I thought that I would walk around to see if they had a shop where you could buy or rent a pole. Well, no luck finding a place, but I did get to the beautiful lake and got to watch another kid learn to fish for a bit. It was getting too depressing for me though, so I just decided to keep moving. I saw a tree on the other side of the lake, though that stood a bit taller than the rest and was slightly darker. Something told me that I needed to go over here, so that's where I headed. As I get closer, I noticed there was a placard in front of the tree that explained what type it was, and also how it got there and etc. But what caught my attention was the border behind it. A few feet behind the tree lines was a small cheap fence separating us from what appeared to be a field that had a lot of dead plants, debris, and the sort, as well as a sign warning of bears. Of course, curiosity got the best of me, and while no one was looking, I tossed my bag, then jumped over the fence. I cautiously made my way through the forbidden land while watching to make sure that no one spotted me. I finally got far enough away that I couldn't make out any people or the starting line, so I started exploring. Along the way, I was stopped by a horrible smell. Hunting with my dad so many times, I knew exactly what it was too. And no surprise though, as it is a forest, wildlife is bound to die or become prey, so I just continued on my way. The smell, however, was getting stronger, so I assumed that I was probably approaching it. I wasn't ready to turn back yet, so I just hoped that I didn't end up disturbing something in the process. The good news was that nothing was there to put me in danger, but the bad news was that I found the source of the smell. It looked like it was a coyote. I know this may be too much for some, but it looked like it had been cut open, like it was being cleaned or prepped by a hunter. The problem was, it hadn't been touched, other than the cut on its abdomen. Who would hunt a coyote of all animals, and who would just leave it like this? I thought it was weird, but I just carried along the way. After several feet and the smell starting to dissipate, I lightened up a bit and I continued to explore. Not long after, though, I came across a bunch of tree branches and rotting broken logs. I started looking through it to see if there was anything of interest in the pieces. When I noticed something of it was wet, I thought it was just sap or water maybe, until I got closer and wiped a piece along the ground with my shoe. It was blood, and as mentioned, it was still wet like it was fresh. This kind of put me on edge after seeing the coyote earlier. I had no idea what this was from or what caused it, but stupid me still wanted to continue on. Further along, I ended up smelling decay again, but this time, it was much worse. I ended up pulling my button up over my nose to try and mask the smell. With what I had already seen, I was determined to find out what was causing this. There was a small ditch that I had to pass over, and on the other side, the grass was even taller. I was about 5'5" at that time, and it went up to about my knees. As I started going over the ditch, I noticed another dead animal in the water. It again looked like a small coyote or a fox. This one was harder to tell by the condition it was in, so I quickly jumped over and walked along the side of the ditch. A few feet away, there was an opening in the grass like someone else had walked through it. What better time to pass through it, right? I could see in the distance, though, what looked like a very old tent, so I thought that I'd make my way toward it, cautiously. Along the way, I started to spot blood again. This time, it looked like a trail, like something was being dragged, and as I got closer to the tent, the smell almost became unbearable. I pulled myself together and made the final steps to this tent. However, it was not a tent. It looked like a tarp that was thrown over a low-hanging branch. I don't know if that was done on purpose or if someone was staying in it, but that was the least of my fears. In front of this tent was another tarp, spread out on the ground, being held down by 4 or 5 carcasses of coyotes, foxes, and a wild hog. These, however, were not looking like they were hunted, in the sense to take home. They were mutilated. There was also one that had been, attached to a tree. Its head was missing, hanging upside down, and even worse, it looked like it was done with some kind of spear. But the part that astounded me even more was how high up it was. The spear was out of my reach. How tall was this person that did this? And why would they do this? And was it even a person? With a combination of alcohol, the heat, and the fear, I ended up getting sick, and I quickly tried to get out of there. I didn't want whatever it was out there to find me. I did find my way back by a close route. That way, I didn't have to see or smell any of that again. But when I approached the tree line near a different part of the lake, I noticed that it had been cut, pushed down, and then attempted to be put back up. Someone or something has obviously been back there as well, as in the actual park, which terrified me even more. What the hell kind of thing is out there with us and doing those kinds of things back there? I regretfully didn't tell anyone though. Hell, I didn't even know if it could have been someone that worked here, and I wasn't supposed to be back there anyways, so I couldn't even think about what I could say. I could finally breathe easy being around large groups of people, and I started walking back to my friends to try and have a good rest of our trip. I can tell you one thing though. It wasn't easy, and I still haven't forgotten about it. And here are the top comments from my last video. And here's the riddle for this video. Hello everyone, it's your creepy sister here. Thank you so much for watching the video. I really appreciate each and every one of you. But I would also like to thank my amazing patrons, my top tippers, and my dearest channel members. Thank you very, very much. I really appreciate it with all of my heart. If you want to support the channel further, you could also choose to become a patron, a tipper, or a channel member. But remember, it's appreciated, but never a requirement. I would also like to announce that we have merch now. The link is in the description of the video, along with all my other social media links, like my Discord server, Twitter, Instagram, and others. You can connect with me and send your stories there. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't yet, and comments are highly appreciated. And remember, your fear feeds me.